If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The resurgence of socialism. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian economist. Well, as the Christian economist, sometimes I get caught between conflicting prescriptions. Christians, well, and really anyone who believes in a higher being, are concerned about the means. We believe that God has prescribed a certain way for us to lead our lives, and our objective is to align with it. Economists, on the other hand, tend to focus on the outcome of a transaction. They almost always take the utilitarian view. But today's topic, socialism, fails on both the Christian worldview and the economic outcomes. As the means, socialism uses power, of which Christians do not approve. And on the ends measure, socialism has failed everywhere it has been tried. So then, why do 65% of young Americans favor it? My information source for this podcast comes from an article titled Capitalism, Socialism, and Nationalism, Lessons from History by Neil Ferguson. After establishing socialism's awful historical record, he asked this question: why then has socialism come back into vogue in our time and in America of all places? Now, he provides 4 answers, and I'll add a 5th if time allows. Now, when you're talking about capitalism and socialism, of course, it depends what is meant by capitalism, which, by the way, Whole Foods founder John Mackey calls capitalism the greatest thing humanity's ever done. But perhaps people don't understand it very well. According to a Gallup poll, just 56% of all Americans have a positive view of capitalism. However, 92% have a positive view of small business, and 86% have a positive view of entrepreneurs, and 79% have a positive view of free enterprise. Now, it also depends what is meant by socialism. Asked by Gallup in this same poll to define socialism, a quarter said it meant equality. I'll look into that idea in a few minutes. Stay tuned. Creative destruction. The first of our 5 concepts is creative destruction. And yes, free market capitalism allows for it. See, the horse and buggy were creatively destroyed by the automobile. Typewriters were creatively destroyed by computers. VHS tapes were creatively destroyed by YouTube, the program on which you're watching this video probably. Aren't those creative destructions good? The guy who invented the phrase creative destruction, Joseph Schumpeter, has an opinion on the subject. In his book, titled Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy from 1942, he predicted that free market capitalism would fail and socialism would replace it. Let's hope he's wrong. In the Christian worldview, creative destruction is part of creation, not the fall. We believe that humans, made in the image of God, use their creative nature to come up with new ways to redeem the earth back to God's creational intent that He had for it. A couple quotes from my little book, Economics and the Christian Worldview, apply here. One is, as long as the fallen nature produces unlimited wants and the creative nature has unlimited creativity, there will be unlimited employment. A second, there's a limited amount of land, and God is not making any more, but He is making creative human beings who discover more efficient ways of using it. Yet, it's always seemed strange to me that progressives don't like creative destruction. So if they want to conserve the economic status quo, that makes them conservatives. We either have a definitional problem or people who call themselves progressives are against progress. Oligopoly. See, the idea that capitalism tends toward oligopoly is correct, and it is a real danger. I warn my classes at Dallas Baptist University. You might want to turn on your recorder because the Christian economist is about to call for more government control. See, if there is one role for government in the economy, it is to maintain and sustain competition. Free market capitalism tends to move toward oligopolies, and that's not good for an economy. I unpack the Christian worldview related to competition in many of my podcasts. An example number 56 is titled Thankful for Capitalism. Podcast 33 is titled Ending Discrimination. And podcast number 7 is called Competition and the Fallen Nature. Yes, totally free market capitalism without some control would likely produce oligopolies and maybe even monopolies, which favor suppliers and harm demanders. Matter of fact, Christian economists should not favor perfect free market capitalism, not perfect socialism, for the same reason. See, they both produce monopolies. Freedom. I call myself the Christian economist. Sometimes there's a disagreement between Christian beliefs and economic outcomes. But when it comes to freedom, we find that not only is there agreement between religion and economics, there's also agreement in politics. All 3 of these disciplines agree that freedom is good. In our book, Biblical Economic Policy, Sergei Seidamatov and I found 10 biblical commandments of economics. The first reads, people should be free. Now, since writing the book, I have reconsidered whether freedom should be simply one of the 10 commandments that we found, or perhaps it should be an overarching concept under which the other 9 should be placed. I'm not going to rewrite the book in this podcast. Suffice it to say that freedom is important in Christianity, economics, and politics. But here's the irony. Free societies allow dissent. That dissent allows socialism to have a voice. But the opposite is also true. Socialist societies use their power to limit dissent. Thus, the weakness of free market capitalism is that it allows freedom. The strength, if you want to see it this way, in socialism is that it does not allow dissent, so it can sustain itself via power. See, I hope you're seeing the absurd level of thinking here. That socialism's strength is its limitation of freedom? Here's an example. Why are most college professors liberal? See, it's a direct indication of their economic self-interest. Let's start with me. I'm in my 29th year on the faculty at Dallas Baptist University. I want our baseball and basketball teams to do better. I want our university to become bigger and more influential. My colleagues at state-supported institutions have the same interest for their universities. They want more support from the state, so they want a larger government. This is pretty simple self-interested economic behavior. What's not so simple is that people don't understand this self-interest. Here's another example. Al Gore is a lifetime liberal, Democrat, who has pushed for bigger government his entire political career. But then when he starts supporting climate change policies that call for bigger government, consumers don't turn on their bias filter. See, without bias filters, we couldn't survive. If a salesman at a Nissan dealership tells you that the Nissan Rogue is the best car for you, wouldn't you run that through your information bias filter? When a mother tells the soccer coach that her son should be playing instead of his teammate, should the coach run that comment through a bias filter? Of course you should. Well, then why do people fail to see the self-interest in state-supported university professors wanting a larger state government? In the article I'm quoting today, Capitalism, Socialism, and Nationalism, Lessons from History, Neil Ferguson goes on to state that, quote, capitalism creates, educates, and subsidizes a vested interest in social unrest, end quote. Now, if I believe the problem with the world was social structures, I would spend a few classes at the university instructing my students in social dissent. Then we would spend the rest of the semester out in the streets protesting. But I don't believe that's the problem with the world. I agree with James Davison Hunter, who in his book called To Change the World, states that the problem with the world is me. You see, the Christian worldview says the problem with the world is the fallen nature of humans. And it does no good to change the social structure of the world if it's still going to be populated by fallen humans. See, that's the fallacy of Marxist doctrine, which motivates the Black Lives Matter movement. Their assumption is that there's something wrong with the system, so they must overthrow it. But it still won't be perfect, so they'll have to overthrow it again. And guess what the third step is? Another overthrow. See, I hope you're getting the point. These economic and political ideas grow out of our worldview. Political power. I will quote Ferguson again. Socialism is politically attractive to bureaucrats and politicians, end quote. Well, yes, power is attractive, not only to politicians, but to every fallen human. I guess the most surprising part of this is that people are not able to see socialism as the exercise of power over others. Acts 2 is often called upon as supporting socialism, but there's no power in verses 44 nor 45 of Acts 2, which reads like this. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Give, not take. See, there are many biblical commands to give. There's no command to take. Socialism is about power. As people in Venezuela found out, you can vote your way in, but you'll have to shoot your way out. Socialism vests power in the state bureaucracy. So our understanding of what we call the fallen nature in theology, or self-interest in economics, predicts this kind of behavior. See, I've dipped my toe in the hot water of climate change in podcasts number 92 and 93, titled Public Ownership and Scarcity. And so I won't repeat all of that today. I have mostly stayed out of that discussion because I don't know how much about it, to tell you the truth, but I do know this. Politicians' response to climate change is an exercise of power. If you are concerned about the recent haphazard and hypocritical exercise of masking power during the COVID crisis, get ready for even more in this upcoming climate change and its rulings that come with it. Political responses to climate change coincide with government control. Referring back to those bias filters that I mentioned earlier, we should have the same defense mechanism for socialist-leaning politicians who propose draconian economic restrictions in the name of climate change. They've even been called watermelon, which means green on the outside and red on the inside, red like the communist red flag. Look, even in economics, the spending multiplier that we hear about in economics, we should ask, what would be the multiplier of those dollars in the private sector? Because they were extracted from profit-making sectors of the economy before they produced the spending multiplier. Inequality. I promised I might add this fifth point, although the Stanford authors leave it out. One of my early podcasts was on this subject. It was podcast number 6, and it was titled, Jesus Distributed the Gospel Unequally. Young Americans don't like the inequality produced by free market capitalism. They do like that grades are distributed unequally in my classes at the university, but that's a hypocrisy that I don't have time to explain today. I think one of the most humorous detractors to inequality is the Pope. Look, the most powerful person in religious life decries inequality. Think about it. You're also welcome to question political leaders who decry inequality, which they practice as they tell you they're against it. Yeah, one of my favorite authors is Thomas Sowell. He has this to say about inequality in his book, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. It is by no means obvious why we should prefer trying to equalize incomes instead of putting our efforts into increasing output. People in general, and the poor in particular, seem to vote with their feet by moving to where there's greater prosperity rather than where there's greater economic equality. Rising standards of living, especially for those at the bottom economically, have resulted not so much from changing the relative sizes of different slices of the economic pie, as from increasing the size of the pie itself. Mr. Sowell just quoted one of the most simple and direct ideas in economics. You can either grow the pie or divide it. Why young Americans want to divide rather than grow is kind of a long-standing question. I think it's because they believe they can do both, but you can't. Every policy suggestion does one or the other. You can't do both. In closing, I'll refer to the title of podcast 97 titled Feeling versus Thinking. The summary is this: socialism feels good. Free market capitalism thinks good. As Sundance said to Butch in the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you're good at. Let's hope young Americans get better at thinking. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.